The four states. The sphere of action belonging to the method of exact science is strictly limited because this sphere is the world of immediate experience accessible for man. In the world lying beyond the domain of usual experience, exact science with its methodology has never penetrated and will never penetrate. The expansion of subjective knowledge is possible only in the event that direct experience is expanded. However, in spite of all the growth of subjective knowledge, science has made no progress in this direction and the borderline of experience remains unaltered. Could science but take one step in this direction, were we able to feel or to sense differently, then we might admit that science could move and take 2, 3, 10 or maybe even 10,000 steps. However, nothing of this sort has occurred and it therefore remains reasonable to believe that it is unlikely to happen. The world outside the experience of the five senses is closed to subjective imagination, and there are some quite definite reasons for this. Not everything that exists can be detected by any of the five senses. Subjective existence is a very narrowly defined form of existence, and does not exhaust or encompass existence as a whole. The mistake of positivism arises in the fact that it has recognized as really existing only that which exists subjectively, and it has constantly denied the existence of anything else. So what is subjectivity? Because of the properties of our receptivity, or because of the conditions under which our psyche operates, we segregate a small number of facts into a definite group. This group of facts in itself represents the subjective world, and it is accessible to the investigation of science. However, in no way does this group in itself represent everything that exists. Extension in space and extension in time constitute the first conditions of subjective existence, and yet the forms of extension of a thing in space and those of its existence in time are created by the cognizing subject and do not belong to the thing itself. Matter is first and foremost three-dimensional, and this three-dimensionality is simply the form of our receptivity. Matter of four dimensions would imply a change in the form of our receptivity. Materiality is the condition of existence in space and time, i.e. a condition of existence under which at one time and in one place two similar phenomena cannot occur. This is an exhaustive definition of materiality, and it is clear that under the conditions known to us two similar phenomena occurring simultaneously in one place will compose one phenomenon. This is obligatory for those conditions of existence that we know, i.e. for such matter as we perceive. For the universe, however, it is in no way obligatory. We constantly observe the conditions of materiality in those cases in which we must create in our life a sequence of phenomena or are obliged to select, because our matter does not allow us to juxtapose in a different interval of time more than a certain number of phenomena. This necessity for selection is perhaps the chief visible sign of materiality. Outside of matter, the necessity for selection is done away with, and if we imagine the life of a feeling being, independent of the conditions of materiality, then such a being will be capable of possessing simultaneously such faculties as from our standpoint are incompatible, opposite and even eliminative of one another, such as the power to be in several places at one time, to command different views of the same thing, and the ability to perform opposite and mutually exclusive actions simultaneously. In speaking of matter, it is necessary to always remember that matter is not a substance, but a condition. Suppose, for example, that a person is blind, then it is impossible to regard this blindness as a substance. It is a condition of the existence of a given individual. Matter is similarly some sort of blindness. Subjective knowledge can grow infinitely, its progress depending upon the perfection of its instruments and the refinement of its methods of observation and experiment. One thing only it cannot transcend: the limits of the three-dimensional sphere, i.e. the conditions of space and time, for the simple reason that subjective knowledge is created under these conditions, and the conditions of the existence of the three-dimensional world are the conditions of its existence. Subjective knowledge will always be subject to these conditions, for otherwise it would cease to exist, and no instrument or apparatus will ever conquer these conditions, for should they thus conquer, they would first of all destroy themselves. Perpetual motion, i.e. a violation of the fundamental laws of the three-dimensional world as we know it, would be the only victory possible over the three-dimensional world in the three-dimensional world itself. It is also necessary to remember that subjective knowledge does not study facts, but only the perception of facts. So in order for subjective knowledge to transcend the limits of the three-dimensional sphere, it is necessary for the conditions of perception to change. As long as this does not happen, our subjective knowledge is confined within the limits of an infinite three-dimensional sphere. It can proceed infinitely upon the radii of that sphere, but it will never penetrate into that region, a section of which constitutes our three-dimensional world. Furthermore, we know from the preceding discourse that should our receptivity become more limited, then subjective knowledge would also be correspondingly limited. It is impossible to convey to a dog the idea of the sphericality of the Earth. To make it remember the weight of the Sun and the distance between the planets is equally impossible. Its subjective knowledge is vastly more personal than ours, and the cause of this lies in the dog's more limited psyche. Thus we see that subjective knowledge depends upon the properties of the psyche. Indeed, between the subjective knowledge of a barbarian and that of an individual such as Herbert Spencer, there is an enormous difference. But that of neither, one nor the other, transcends the limit of the three-dimensional sphere, i.e. the limits of the conditional or the unreal. In order to transcend the three-dimensional sphere, it is necessary to change the forms of receptivity. Is the expansion of the limits of receptivity possible? The study of complex forms of consciousness assures us that indeed it is possible. Plotinus, the famous Alexandrian philosopher of the 3rd century, affirmed that for perfect knowledge the subject and object must be united, that the rational agent and the thing being comprehended must not be separate. For that which sees, is itself the thing which is seen. See, select works of Plotinus, edited by G.R.S. Mead, translate by Thomas Taylor, and published by Bourne's Library, see page 271. Here it is necessary to understand the words to see outside of the literal sense. The seeing changes with the changes of the state of consciousness in which it is proceeding. But what forms of consciousness exist? The ancient wisdom, an outline of theosophical teachings published in 1939, and written by Annie Besant, notes that Hindu philosophy makes the division into 4 states of consciousness: sleep, dream, waking and the state of absolute consciousness. Authorship by Turiya. According to the interpretation of the Southern Hindu school of occultism, the 4 states of consciousness are understood in somewhat different order. The most remote from the true and the most illusory is the waking state. The second, sleep, is already closer to the true, and the third, deep sleep without dreams, contacts with the true. The fourth, samadhi, or ecstasy, is union with the true. G.R.S. Mead, in the preface to Thomas Taylor's Select Works of Plotinus, correlates the terminology of Shankaracharya, the leader of the Advaita Vedanta school of ancient India, with that of Plotinus. The first or spiritual state was ecstasy. From ecstasy it forgot itself into deep sleep. From profound sleep it awoke out of unconsciousness, but still within itself, into the internal world of dreams. From dreaming it passes finally into the thoroughly waking state and the outer world of sense. Ecstasy is the term used by Plotinus, and it is identical with the term and the expression of Turiya in Hindu psychology. The consciousness which is in a waking condition is surrounded by what constitutes its sense organs and receptive apparatus in the phenomenal world. It differentiates the subjective from the objective and differentiates its forms of perception from reality. It recognizes the phenomenal subjective world as reality and dreams as unreality, including with it, as being unreal, the entire objective world. Its vague sensation of real things, lying beyond that which is apprehended by the organs of sense, i.e. sensations of noumena, consciousness identifies with dreams, with the unreal, imaginary, abstract and objective, regarding phenomena as the only reality. Gradually convinced by reason of the unreality of phenomena, or inwardly sensing this unreality and the reality which lies behind, we free ourselves from the mirage of phenomena and begin to understand that the phenomenal world is in substance objective also, that the great realities lie deep down. Then a complete change takes place in consciousness regarding all of its concepts of reality. That which before was regarded as real becomes unreal, and that which was regarded as unreal becomes real. The concepts of the subjective and objective should undergo change, however, the usual terminology would be incorrect for an exact understanding of this. Everything phenomenal will become objective, and that which under ordinary conditions is regarded as objective and therefore non-existent will remain truly subjective. This transition into the absolute state of consciousness is union with divinity, the vision of God, experiencing the kingdom of heaven or entering into a state of nirvana. All these expressions of mystical religion represent the psychological fact of the expansion of consciousness into first global, then cosmic and eventually universal consciousness. Such an expansion of consciousness eventually absorbs itself into the all. C. W. Ledbetter, in an essay, Some Notes on the Higher Planes, Nirvana, published in The Theosophist, during July 1910 writes, Sir Edwin Arnold wrote of that beatific condition where the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. Those who have passed through the most marvelous of experiences know that, paradoxical as it may seem, the sensation is exactly the reverse, and that a far closer description would be that the ocean had somehow been pumped into the drop. The consciousness, wide as the sea, with its center everywhere and its circumference nowhere, is a great and glorious fact. But when a person attains it, then it seems to them that their consciousness has widened to take in all that, not that they are merging into something else. This pouring of the ocean into a single drop occurs because consciousness never loses itself, i.e. does not disappear and does not become extinguished. When it seems to us that consciousness is extinguished, in reality it is only changing its form, which ceases to be analogous to ours, and we lose the means of convincing ourselves of its existence. We have no exact information to think that it is dissipated. Also, in order to escape from the field possible for our observations, it is sufficient for consciousness to change but a little. In the subjective world, indeed, this slipping of the dew drop into the sea leads to the annihilation of the drop, to the absorption of it by the sea. We have never observed another order of things in the subjective world and therefore cannot imagine it. However, in the real, i.e. the objective world, of course another order must exist and operate. The drop of consciousness merging with the sea of consciousness knows it, but does not itself cease to exist because of that. Therefore, undoubtedly, the sea is absorbed by the drop. In the letters to Flaccus of Plotinus can be found a wonderful description of psychology, and a theory of knowledge founded upon the idea of the expansion of receptivity. External objects present us only with appearances. Concerning them, therefore, we may be said to possess opinion rather than knowledge. The distinctions in the actual world of appearance are of import only to ordinary and practical men. Our question lies with the ideal reality that exists behind appearance. How does the mind perceive these ideas? Are they without us, and is the reason, like sensation, occupied with objects external to itself? What certainty would we then have? What assurances that our perception was infallible? The object perceived would be something different from the mind perceiving it. We should have then an image instead of reality. It would be monstrous to believe that for a moment that the mind was unable to perceive ideal truth as it is, and that we had not certainty and real knowledge concerning the world of intelligence. It follows, therefore, that this region of truth is not to be investigated as a thing external to us, and so imperfectly known. It is within us. Here the objects we contemplate and that which contemplates are identical, both are thought. The subject cannot surely know an object different from itself. The world of ideas lies within our intelligence. Truth, therefore, is not the agreement of our apprehension of an external object with the object itself. It is an agreement of the mind with itself. Consciousness, therefore, is the sole basis of certainty. The mind is its own witness, and reason sees in itself that which is above itself and its source, and again that which is below itself is still itself once more. Knowledge has 3 degrees: opinion, science, and illumination. The means or instrument of the first is sense, of the second is dialectic, and of the third is intuition. To the last, I subordinate reason, for it is absolute knowledge founded upon the identity of the mind knowing with the object known. There is a raying out of all orders of existence, an external emanation from the ineffable One. There is again a returning impulse, drawing all upward and inward toward the center from whence it came. The wise man recognizes the idea of the good within him. This he develops by withdrawal into the holy place of his own soul. He who does not understand how the soul contains the beautiful within itself seeks to realize beauty without, by laborious production. His aim should rather be to concentrate and simplify, and so to expand his being, instead of going out into the manifold, to forsake it for the one and to float upward towards the divine fount of being, whose stream flows within him. You ask, how can we know the infinite? I answer, not by reason. It is the office of reason to distinguish and define. The infinite therefore cannot be ranked among its objects. You can only apprehend the infinite by faculty superior to reason, by entering into a state in which you are your finite self no longer, in which the divine essence is communicated to you. This is ecstasy. It is the liberation of your mind from its finite consciousness. Like can only apprehend like. When you thus cease to be finite, then you become one with the infinite. In the reduction of your soul to its simplest self, its divine essence, you realize this union, this identity. But this sublime condition is not of permanent duration. It is only now and then that we are able to enjoy this elevation above the limits of the body and the world. I myself have realized it but 3 times as yet, and Porphyry hitherto not once. All that tends to purify and elevate the mind will assist you in this attainment and facilitate the approach and the recurrence of these happy intervals. There are then different roads by which this end may be reached. The love of beauty which exalts the poet, that devotion to the One, and that ascent of science which makes the ambition of the philosopher, that love of prayers by which some devout and ardent soul tends in its moral purity towards perfection. These are the great highways conducting to the height above the actual and the particular, where we stand in the immediate presence of the infinite who shines out from the depths of the soul. In another place in his works Plotinus defines the ecstatic knowledge more exactly, presenting such properties of it as reveal what the infinite expansion of subjective knowledge is meant to be. When we see God, says Plotinus, we see him not by reason, but by something that is higher than reason. It is impossible, however, to say about him who sees that he sees, because he does not behold and discern 2 different things, the seer and the thing seen. He changes completely and ceases to be himself, preserving nothing of his ire. Immersed in God, he constitutes one whole with him, like the center of a circle which coincides with the center of another far greater circle.